I mean, there are some people we could point out, some names we could point the finger at. I'm looking at you, you absolute piece of shit. So this is an interesting article. This decade has been a double-edged sword for trans people. Break the binary. Vox says the internet has made trans people visible, but also left them more vulnerable. I agree so far. In 2010, the US had its first black president. Facebook hasn't gone public yet, and people still thought I was a man. The way I experienced these past 10 years as a trans woman almost mirrors the status of the trans community at large, ostensibly as a happily married man, trying to build my life and career while repressing my gender identity. 5 years in, I found my true self through persistent self-exploration, and now I'm leaving the decade scared shitless. Few marginalized communities have experienced such dramatic whiplash of fortunes over the course of the 2010s as trans people. We exit the decade with trans people starring in regular roles on television and film, and transgender journalists beginning to break through into the traditionally cisgendered controlled media apparati. This year, 24% of Americans reported having a close friend or family member who is transgender. Fuck yes, 25%! It's a beautiful thing, 25%. According to the Public Religion Research Institute poll, that's more than double the 11% who knew a trans person in 2011. Visibility has an impact on our rights as well. In 2010, only trans people who could afford expensive surgery were able to legally change genders. Heaven forbid if you happen to be non-binary. I mean, oof, good luck. I mean, watch some of Eva's streams lately where they're trying to convince their doctor about transitioning and all the stuff they're trying to go to, all the stuff they're going through, basically trying to explain how they're non-binary, how they experience gender dysphoria, but the doctor is just kind of trying to wrap his head around the whole thing. It's just, it's really unfortunate. Now, just 9 states require surgery in order to change gender markers on state ID, while 13 states, plus the District of Columbia, now allow non-binary gender markers on IDs. The singular they was named 2019's Word of the Year by Merriam-Webster. Did everyone here know that? Did all y'all know that? The singular they was named 2019's Word of the Year. Where centuries-old conceptions of gender are now being regularly challenged in popular culture, begins and ends with the thing that we love to hate, the internet. While the early internet of the 2000s established a way for trans people to connect with each other quickly over long distances, the second wave of web progress, social media and YouTube, has helped trans people leverage visibility into substantial policy gain. But with the progress also came conservative backlash and campaigns to discredit our basic human rights. The internet, as trans visibility at large, has devolved into a double-edged sword for the trans community. It's a dynamic I'm all too familiar with, and too true. I mean, there are some people we could point out, some names we could point the finger at. I'm looking at you, you absolute piece of shit. I mean, you have to be one of the people who's single-handedly working actively to continuously spread misinformation and really just vile filth. Vile, disgusting filth. You petty, small little man. And no, I'm not being heightist. I'm saying you're small in character. I'm not saying that you are small in size or stature. I'm saying that you're a small, petty, horrible, grisly excuse for a human being. But thank you for taking the time to come on the show. I do appreciate that, and I know obviously that your time is a lot more valuable than mine. I get that. So thank you for all that. But fuck you, sir. Fuck you. Ugh, disgusting, horrible, petty, small, very small man. Very small, but thanks again. I do appreciate it. I know it can't be easy to make these kind of bookings, especially with this kind of show that we have here. So thank you. These years of questioning and exploration aligned with the series of high-profile trans people coming out. It was also in public consciousness on trans people, and out issues started to shift. Free Chelsea Manning. Please free her. Free her now. Chelsea Manning came out as a trans woman on the eve of her sentencing hearing in 2013, accompanied by a grainy black and white photo of her in a blonde wig. While discussions of her crimes were highly politicized, for many Americans, Manning was the first trans person to receive wall-to-wall coverage in the 24-hour cable news cycle. Then came Time magazine's Transgender Tipping Point cover featuring Laverne Cox in 2014. The magazine declared that the transgender movement had arrived, presenting trans rights as the next great civil rights struggle. Even after the tipping point, though, journalists and media still struggled with how to talk about trans lives and experiences. Anytime a transgender person would speak about their experience in a talk show or a journalistic setting before 2014, people felt that it was perfectly appropriate to ask detailed questions about our genitals, our bodies, our sex lives, surgeries that we've had, up to asking whether or not we have orgasms. It was just the way things were. Nick Adams, director of transgender representation at the LGBTQ media advocacy organization GLAAD, told Vox. The media dynamic only began to shift after the pivotal Cox moment. In a 2014 interview, Katie Couric asked trans model and actress Carmen Carrera invasive questions about her genitalia and transition. Couric's next guest was Cox, who pointed out how Couric had been out of line. According to Adams, Cox was one of the first trans people to immediately push back on an interview's inappropriate questions. Let's take a look.
I think that the preoccupation with transition and with surgery objectifies trans people, and then we don't get to really deal with the real lived experiences. The reality of trans people's lives is that so often we're targets of violence. We experience discrimination disproportionately to the rest of the community. Our unemployment rate is twice the national average. If you're a trans person of color, it's 4 times the national average. The homicide rate in the LGBT community is highest amongst trans women. And when we focus on transition, we don't actually get to talk about those things. There's a young woman named Ilan Nettles who on August 17th was just walking down the street with some friends, you know, minding her own business, and she was catcalled by a couple of guys. And one of them, once they realized she was trans, she was beaten into a coma, and 5 days later she died. This is the reality of so many trans people's lives in this country, trans women of color whose lives are in danger simply for being who they are. And we're looking for justice for Ilan's murder, and we're looking for justice for so many trans people across this country. And by focusing on bodies, we don't focus on the lived realities of that oppression and that discrimination.
Wow, was that eloquent? Holy smokes. I like to think that she had practiced it maybe once or twice at home beforehand, because, man, that just... I wish I could speak anywhere close to that. I mean, those who know, devotees of the show will know, that anytime I've tried to have any serious or eloquent discussions, kind of just... File transitions. A decade and a half of digital organizing had already been taking place, positioning the trans community for its moment in the sun. Since the trans community is relatively small, roughly only about 0.6% of adults in the US, traditional local organizing was the next to impossible outside of large cities like New York or San Francisco. For trans people, the internet became a critical revolutionary tool. In the early 2010s, I was still closeted with my wife and children. I didn't have access to local trans communities where I lived in Maine, and I mainly used my Twitter account to follow soccer news. Seeing them discuss topics that I was interested in alongside trans issues or their personal transitions was how I was eased into accepting my own trans identity. Eventually, I started my own anonymous trans account, which initially was meant to document the tragic comedy of being a closeted trans woman, but it quickly became a place to take baby steps into expressing my authentic identity without suddenly jumping into real-world situations. The internet was a game changer as far as I'm concerned, trans writer and activist Monica Roberts told Vox. Unlike the 90s, we now have real-time communication links where we can not only talk to each other's nationality, but internationally and in an inexpensive way. According to Roberts, the early internet not only helped trans people organize politically, but also gave trans people access to traditional resources and language to describe their gender identity on a massive scale. People who aren't able to get into the writer's room in Hollywood, or who are not journalists, can create a cool platform on social media. Whoa, how do you do, fellow kids? You can create a cool platform on social media that extends to the trans community and appeals to other people who don't know someone who's transgendered in their lives, Adam said. Those cisgender people are able to learn something about us because they follow someone on social media who has a smart and intelligent voice. That is the way in which I think social media can help change public attitudes about transgender people. And also, I think that it should be said that there's also some cishetes who have done a really good job at promoting trans awareness. I'm looking at you, H-Bomber guy. Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act barred insurance companies from excluding people with pre-existing conditions, amongst them people with gender dysphoria. Before that, trans people with gender dysphoria diagnoses often couldn't access health insurance at all. The Obama administration also barred insurance companies from making blanket exclusions on trans-related health care, opening the door for thousands of trans people to medically transition who couldn't previously afford it. Yes, beautiful. When trans people to use bathrooms according to their lived gender, conservatives seize upon the narrative that a trans woman are really creepy men who didn't belong in women's restrooms. No men in women's restrooms became the latest right-wing rallying cry as conservatives melted down at the prospect of a society that might become slightly less easier for trans people to live in. My word. Unfortunately, the statistics do not back that up. It's it's not a thing. There's not men dressing up as women to go into women's washrooms and molest them. It's not a thing. It's just completely made up. There is isolated incidents. There's one or two little stories that, of course, you get to see echoed and re-echoed and Andy Node through the intersphere, but statistically, no. It's no surprise to anyone. Statistically, it's cis men who happen to be the ones who are going into bathrooms and sexually harassing women or worse. The following year would see North Carolina enact its now infamous bathroom bill requiring trans people to use the restroom denoted by their original birth certificate in all publicly owned buildings, which included schools. Through it all, the internet was a powerful messaging and recruiting tool for anti-trans activist movements. You hate to see it, folks. You hate to see it. It also had the desired effect of making trans people second guess whether or not to appear in public spaces, which is just so sad. I mean, god damn it. The existence of trans people presents a fundamental threat to gender hierarchy pushed by the cultural and religious conservatives. Many Christian fundamentalists envision a particularly family structure where God looks over the patriarchy of the family, who is responsible for protecting and providing for his wife and kids. The mother of the family is responsible for managing the home and producing Christian children, while children must be obedient to their parents. In 2015, the Family Research Council developed a document that spelled out how religious conservatives should respond to the trans rights movement, and then found its most critical partner the following year. The election of Donald Trump was a key turning point. The past several years, I felt a bit like those first few years after graduating college. I'm learning how to adult in a new gender, in a new career, and doing it all in a new city. I find myself at peace with the life I've left behind, to live the life I needed to live. I'm filled with equal parts hope and trepidation for the next chapter. As trans people enter the next decade, many of us also find ourselves and our rights on knife's edge. Trans issues have hit the Supreme Court for the first time with a case that could determine trans employment rights for a generation. Then there's the 2020 election, which could determine whether our rights will be further eroded or finally protected. In the meantime, the internet is now the battleground on which we fight against hate, against intolerance, against disinformation. But mostly, we fight for the right to exist on our own bodies. The past decade, we have proven that we are capable taking a political punch and remaining on our feet. Trans community is stronger. Can I get some trans rights in chat? Can we flood the chat with some trans rights? Can we just get some good feels, some good, warm, cozy, blankety feels, some beauty, some wonder, some gorgeous colors, by the way? Man, I gotta say this, and I'm gonna be totally frank, the trans community got the best mother effing flag of any of the LGBTQ. I'm sorry. I mean, I love the rainbow. I do. Who doesn't love a rainbow? But the trans flag, the colors, they're just so perfect. Oh man, are they ever beautiful? Are they ever a beautiful thing?
Did you enjoy what you just watched and now crave more nectar of the damned? Did you know that if you're watching on YouTube, you're only getting half the surfy experience? We upload all of our content commercial and censorship free to our Patreon. Due to the general demonetization of our videos, we now upload half of our original content directly to those who can help us produce this show. Want even more nectar than that? Well, come join us at twitch.tv/TheSerfsTV, where we do weekly live streams, debates, interviews, AMAs, and more. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can help support our show 100% free by subscribing to our Twitch channel. So come join us, be merry, and know that your support is helping us do great things.
Like pay rent and eat.
We would first and foremost like to thank our god, Nicholas Marks. We worship at your temple. We would like to thank our monarch, Elsie Hupp. Your generosity has made this entire thing possible. We would like to thank our lords, Ricky Pilgrim, I'm Raft, and Michaela Schmidt. You are the pillars of our organization. To our Knights of the Surf Table, Paul Parfit, Daniel Kahn, Fair Tahan, Clement Chutskoff, Schizosaurus, Josh Mickelson, Dr. Zayas, Cooper Pilot, Andre Lynn Epperly, Dylan Bith, Terry, Todd Buckingham, Jed Lewis, Todd Lajeunesse.